So, using Mr. Nichols as an example for this assignment, um, the first question is, how did the war personally affect the interviewee? And I think the first example for Mr. Nichols' experience is he got drafted. And like he said in his story, he was kind of floundering in college and felt like he didn't really know what he was going to do with his life. And I think just went to college because he felt pressured to, not because he wanted to. So he ended up getting drafted when he left college and dropped out after a year or two. And then I asked him how it personally affected him, and his direct quote was, "The war changed everybody in ways that you can't talk about and that you can't explain." And he said he saw some pretty horrible things that he can't even really speak about or doesn't like to think about. So it definitely affected him on a personal level. The second question is his perception of the war, which I've asked him about this, and a direct quote from him would be, he said he talked to his dad when he came back, and he felt like we either needed to fight the war all the way and send as many troops and use as many weapons as necessary, or not fight at all. And another quote from him on this topic is he said, if you don't hate your enemies enough to fight them all the way, then you shouldn't fight them at all. So, I mean, I definitely agree with him, because fighting a war with one hand tied behind your back and fighting a limited war against an enemy who's fighting an unlimited total war, from their perspective, is just not a disaster to, or not a recipe to be successful, and it's going to lead to disaster eventually. Um, and looking at those pictures, he definitely remembered the fourth one, which is the helicopter on top of the Saigon embassy with what looks like hundreds of Vietnamese trying to get on that last Huey out of Saigon before the NVA and Viet Cong come in and arrest or execute all those people who couldn't fit on the helicopter. Which definitely shows that some Americans feel like we left those guys behind and betrayed them because they were allies, and some, it's kind of like you have to cut ties eventually, and we did what we could for their country, but it was inevitable that they were going to get overrun by the Viet Cong and the NVA. So definitely mixed feelings on that last picture. For me, it's hard to pick the most important lesson. It's a cop-out to say these are the most important lessons, because most important, by definition, is only one. But I think if I could only pick one, it would definitely be how we view the presidency. And prior to this, I think a lot of people would have said during wartime, whether you declare war, it's just a police action like the Korean War, that we really trust the American president to do whatever he wants and use whatever weapons and troops he deems necessary, even if he does not have congressional approval. And I think the weird dynamic where JFK kind of got us intertwined in Vietnam with the advisors, and then LBJ inherited that when JFK got assassinated, and after the Gulf of Tonkin incident, he got Congress to give him a blank check, basically say do whatever you want in Vietnam. And that was really a recipe for disaster, because even if the people disagreed, there's no democratic way to rein in the president, because Congress isn't giving him approval. He's just, doing what he wants because Congress gave him a blank check with the Gulf of Tonkin resolution. And then, like we learned about this week, you have Nixon who comes in and he says we want peace with dignity, and a lot of people think he kind of sabotaged the Paris peace talks because he wanted the war to keep going longer. And when the Pentagon Papers showed the American public that he had been expanding the war into Cambodia and Laos, it's really hard to trust a president. After what LBJ did, here comes this guy that says peace with dignity and will find a way to get out of Vietnam without losing or being embarrassed or betraying the South Vietnamese, and come to find out he's actually expanding the war, and the bombing campaign drastically increases against the North. And, I just think ever since then, people are a lot more leery of the president. And that's why in 1975, Congress passed the War Powers Resolution, which puts pretty strict limits on the president's ability to wage war without congressional approval. And a fun question to think about, this lesson of don't let the president just do what he wants with our troops, is what if that would have been in place, say, in 1961 when JFK got inaugurated, where you can't send troops somewhere for more than basically 90 days without Congress approving it. Because I feel like at some point, 69 or 70, that Congress probably would have ordered our troops to come home based on the protests and the My Lai massacre and the Pentagon Papers, and then the Kent State shootings. I mean, a lot of public opinion was definitely against the war by that point, but Congress didn't really have a say. So for me, I feel like that's the most important lesson, is that we just don't trust presidents the same, and we've limited their power. I think some other valid lessons: don't fight wars halfway. If you're going to fight, go all out or don't fight at all. Another one is, even though tensions are high in 1964 with the Gulf of Tonkin incident, if you think about what the North Vietnamese did, they're just shooting at our ships, which were off their coast, spying on them, and that's really just kind of self-defense. And to use that as a justification to turn this into an American war where we take over and send, at the peak, almost 500,000 troops in country, it's kind of a petty reason. And I think another lesson is, while tensions are high and emotions are high, you have to think about history, because what the French did, there's still French soldiers that are lying in Vietnam, who got killed and ambushed and tried to fight the Viet Minh. And they learned by 1954, after Dien Bien Phu, they just couldn't win. And it's better to cut and run, I think, and kind of cauterize the wound quick than let it bleed out slowly, like Nixon did, and say peace with dignity, when really we're just dragging on this war that you're not going to win, fighting it the way we were. So I think that's a lesson, and 9/11 is a great example. Most Americans don't know the history in Afghanistan, but you can't just ignore that and say, we're mad, someone attacked us, let's go start a war. That's understandable at the time, and you can't discount that when you look back at something. But it's really important to look at historical examples of, who's the last country that invaded Vietnam? How did it work out for them? And the answer is pretty clear. And, that's really true with Afghanistan as well. So I think those are all good lessons, and I look forward to hearing what you guys consider to be your most important, and how your interview went, and what your person thought about these questions.